Hello, everyone. Welcome to True Horror Anecdotes. Enjoy. It's been a few years since this happened to me, and I feel ready to share my very creepy and uncomfortable encounter, even though it's been a few years since this happened. To this day, I still feel sick to my stomach about that night. I'm a female, and when I was in my very early 20s, I lived in some pretty run-down and cheap apartments that were known for being in a sketchy area. There was this neighbor I had that just gave me the heebie-jeebies. There was just something off about this guy, but I couldn't figure it out. He always seemed to be listening to James Brown and Motown, but even though he seemed a bit off, I thought to myself, well, he couldn't possibly be that weird if he's chilling to some old-school music. Anyway, I'd hear him blast his music and have loud conversations on the phone. This got annoying pretty quickly as we both had studio apartments that were basically touching with thin walls, so I could practically hear him whisper. I'd sometimes play music so I wouldn't have to hear his so loudly. One night, he was drinking a lot and had his girlfriend around. I could tell he was drunk because his speech was slurred and you could hear him being belligerent, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary for him, I suppose. It wasn't too late, so I headed out for the night with some friends while my boyfriend at the time stayed in. I got dropped off around 1 a.m. or so, and as we were driving into the parking lot from afar, we saw my neighbor outside. He was crouched behind a car and was facing the apartment, looking sort of odd. Okay. This guy is definitely weird. I just pretended like I didn't even notice it. Whatever, this guy is just creepy anyway. At that point, my friends were even more weirded out than I was, but I didn't think much of it and had them drop me off near the entrance because it was easier for them to leave. They dropped me off at my apartment, but I had to pass my neighbors first. I swear my heart dropped because, as I was passing by my neighbor's apartment, I saw him now standing still by the side of the bush that is between our apartments. It almost looked like that funny Homer Simpson bush meme, but actually not funny whatsoever because, as I got closer, he remained as still as a statue. It seemed like he thought maybe I didn't see him because it was so dark out. I waved and mumbled, "Hi," because it was so obvious that I could see him, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't. At that point, after acknowledging he was there, he stepped out of the side of the bush and came into the dim porch light. I was horrified at what I saw. Never in my life have I looked into eyes like that. My heart started racing. His eyes were widened, dark, and fully dilated just like a wild animal. He looked like a lunatic. He didn't say anything but instead gave me a bone-chilling look. I ran into my apartment immediately. My boyfriend was drowsy since it was late, but he did say that the neighbor's music was loud and continued for some time. He also said he heard a ton of noise and arguing earlier, but didn't think anything of it. Later that night, we were watching TV when all of a sudden, we heard a loud thump sound. It kind of sounded like someone was moving furniture or something. It was obviously my creepy neighbor. It just weirded me out knowing he was awake in the demented-looking state I had seen him in not too long ago. He looked like a primal animal. The noises continued throughout the night. The next morning, I heard the cops outside banging on his door. I'm not gonna lie. I was partially relieved to see them, but then super scared of why they were there in the first place. They took him away in handcuffs shortly after demanding to be let in. They then asked me, when was the last time I had talked to or seen him? I told them all that happened that night. The arguing, the loud noises, the frightening encounter, and the thumping noise all night. What I found out the next day still makes my stomach turn to this day. I was told this by the groundskeeper, and here are the details that I will keep simple since it was horrendous. That weird neighbor who lived right next to me brutally murdered his girlfriend that night. He dismembered parts of her and dragged the rest of her body near the train tracks, which was directly behind our apartments. That's when it hit me. The cold, primal, and wide-eyed look I had seen in that man was that of a person who had just committed a heinous crime. She would usually be asking for cigarettes when I encountered her. To this day, my stomach turns thinking about how close I was to a life-threatening situation. I could have been that guy's next victim. Quite literally. He could have ambushed me out of insanity since he was just waiting in the darkness when I walked up. A message to all of you. Always follow your gut feeling. Listen to it. If you have a bad feeling about someone, even if they seem harmless, stay a safe distance the hell away from them. I moved into a different apartment right after because I was spending too much time thinking about the whole ordeal. That neighbor went to jail, and I saw his booking photo. It was scary to see him again, and I just hope he's staying in jail where he belongs. I'm a girl, and I grew up in a not-so-big city. It was the largest in our state, but with a reputation for being rough, plagued by violence and crime. My home was at the edge of one of the city's tougher neighborhoods in a trailer park right next to a local bar. This bar had a habit of getting shut down due to the noise and fights, but it always reopened with a new name. I was well aware of encountering sketchy and weird people who seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had many neighbors I was warned to stay away from. It was just the way things were in that area, and I learned early on to be cautious as people could be dangerous. Our trailer was located with a fence on one side, separating us from the bar and another trailer. The other trailer was often empty or abandoned for a long time, but it had been home to a single mom and her 2 daughters. They were younger than me and had become my friends in the trailer park, especially after some unfair evictions by our strange landlady a few years ago. However, when the single mom and her kids were forced to leave, a creepy guy moved in. This marked a turning point for me. I was in my first year of high school, around 13 or 14 years old, and I was beginning to realize that my family situation was in shambles. It was a tough realization. When those girls and their mom who used to be my neighbors left, it hit me hard. Even though they were younger than me, they were my only friends in the trailer park. The new creepy guy that moved in was the only official resident, but during the first year or so, I often saw him in his yard with a group of guys. These guys were older than me, but younger than my parents, likely in their late 20s to mid-30s. Sometimes he and his friends would act rowdy when they were drunk, similar to the people at the bar on the other side. From the day he moved in, things got really weird. Unfortunately, the first oddity came from my stepfather, who was a truly awful person. He took pleasure in his racism and found it amusing. Within about 2 weeks, my stepfather had a 6-foot fence built between our trailers. He didn't want the new neighbor on the tiny strip of our property, but that had never been an issue before. He enjoyed saying mean and hurtful things to him. While we built the fence, our new neighbor never complained about my stepfather's hate-filled words or the bizarre fence. Instead, he remained polite and would always wave at us when he saw us come home. This made me feel embarrassed. I felt like I owed this stranger for not responding to my stepfather's hate with more hate, but rather with kindness. Sadly, this reaction led to a dangerous situation. Before the fence was finished, he and his friends would move closer to the front of his trailer whenever they saw me heading to check the mailbox by myself. Our mailbox was in the middle of the trailer park, and it was one of my chores to collect the mail. They would be inside on the porch or in the yard as I walked by, but every time I returned, they would gather in the front yard or driveway. He would greet me, and his friends would simply stare and then laugh. I was no stranger to feeling uneasy around strangers, and my family used to tease me for being overly cautious. However, my gut feelings had kept me safe on many occasions, so I had learned not to be ashamed of my caution. Despite this, I used to feel anxious when I saw these guys, and I thought they were laughing because I appeared scared. Over time, I grew more comfortable saying hello and waving to them. However, they continued to laugh, and this made me feel increasingly uneasy. I couldn't figure out why they were laughing, though. Were they laughing at me? Was it my voice? My smile? Could it be the way I waved? Did I have a strange walk? I don't know. Most of the time, I just wished they would ignore me. Then one day, as I walked to the mailbox, the neighbor approached me and started walking alongside me. This became a daily routine. He would walk with me, asking questions about my day, school, and other typical topics. I didn't really enjoy it. But my gut feeling was always on edge when he was near me, but back then I didn't trust my own feelings. I had been told so many times that I was foolish for being scared. I kept scolding myself for being overly cautious around this seemingly nice man who had done nothing wrong. One thing to mention is that he never checked his mailbox when we went to get the mail together. If he had, it might have put my mind at ease, as it would have been normal for him to do so occasionally. The nature of our conversations during these mailbox trips began to change. A few days later, we were at the mailboxes again, and then he suddenly said, "Hey, don't tell your dad I said this, but you've got really great legs." I couldn't understand why, but at that moment, all I wanted to do was cry and take a shower. My parents took a long time to realize that I might not be telling the truth when I claimed there was nothing in the mailbox on that day. My mom got angry and thought I was just too lazy to walk to the mailbox. Finally, I decided to tell her the truth. I was scared of the neighbor, and then I shared with my mom what had happened at the mailbox, how he walked with me, and what he had said. My mom found it amusing and thought I was just being silly and shy, and getting scared for no reason. She even brought it up during dinner and insisted I tell my stepfather. I hoped that maybe my stepfather would understand my feelings, given that the neighbor had explicitly told me not to tell him, but my stepfather remained quiet for a bit and then said, "Well, you do have nice legs, so what?" I felt embarrassed because it seemed like it was nothing and I needed to calm down. I eventually resumed checking the mail, but strangely the neighbor didn't accompany me anymore. I felt guilty and worried that I had hurt his feelings. He also wasn't hanging out with his friends as much, and when he was home, he was often alone. Now, fast forward a few months. I started seeing him randomly when I was home alone or checking the mail. He would wave and smile at me, making me feel even more ashamed for overreacting. However, one evening while I was taking a shower, my mother banged on the door and scolded me for steaming up the bathroom, claiming it could cause mold on the carpet, so as I had done many times before, I turned the crank to open a small window in the shower to let some steam out. This window was situated near the top, close to my forehead, but it was only about 4 to 5 inches tall and extended along the whole wall of the shower. I had been opening it while showering almost every day since I was 5 or 6. However, you couldn't really see the person in the shower, just their head, and even then you'd have to be looking closely to notice it. I opened it a little, but then I heard a noise. I looked out and made eye contact with the neighbor right away. I quickly crouched down a bit to hide my head and tried to continue with my shower, but I felt exposed and extremely uncomfortable. A couple of minutes later, I decided to peek out the window again just to make sure it was just a coincidence. However, he was still there leaning on his porch railing, and he had a very creepy smile on his face. When our eyes met once more, I closed the window and hurried to finish my shower. I started taking very quick cold showers to avoid opening the window. Not long after these uncomfortable shower incidents began, he started waiting outside for me when I got home from school. I used to walk home from the bus stop, and he always seemed to be in front of his trailer. Initially, it happened occasionally, but then it became a daily occurrence. He would step into my path and block me from reaching my front gate. He engaged with me in small talk, just like when we walked to the mailbox. I always replied politely, but also told him that I really needed to get inside and take care of my dogs who had been alone all day while my parents were at work. I had been at school around that time, and a girl about a year younger than me moved into the park at the far end. She was friendly, and we had a class together, but we hadn't really talked to each other. Well, that changed one day when we got off the bus and she asked if I wanted her to walk with me. I was surprised and confused by her offer, but I was also excited because I thought maybe he'd leave me alone if I wasn't by myself. So I agreed. And then she asked if I knew the strange guy who lived next door to me. I felt so relieved that someone else found him creepy, and I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. She told me that about a week before, she had stopped at the landlord's trailer to ask a question. When she left the landlord's trailer, she saw me walking to my door and he was just standing there watching. As soon as he noticed her, he started walking with her and tried talking to her. He was even telling her how pretty she was and that she had beautiful hair. She told him to go away and then ran all the way home. So, we came up with a plan. She would walk me to my driveway, and then I'd stay on my porch and watch her until she turned the corner where I couldn't see her anymore. He eventually stopped waiting for us after school. To this day, he hasn't walked with us again, and we both talked to each other about what this creepy man's intention was. I have a few ideas, but I don't want to make direct conclusions as I'm not sure about it. So, let me tell you guys a story about my neighbors who are extremely odd. They are a married couple with 5 kids ranging from the age of 6 to 13. They are Mormon, I think, which isn't anything stranger than social awkwardness. They don't drink, and I have never seen them eat food at neighborhood gatherings either. Their younger child is quite possibly the shyest little girl I have ever seen or heard of. It's very difficult to get her to speak. I always thought she was a mute, but I suppose that happens to not be the strangest thing. Here's what strikes me as odd. They are almost never ever outside. Our neighborhood is small, but full of kids playing outside in the cul-de-sac almost every day. Those kids only step outside for activity other than transportation maybe once or twice a year. It also strikes me as odd how within 5 kids of various ages, one of them is exceptionally pale and not outdoorsy. Now, there is an exception to this, however. The youngest shy girl would come play with my youngest daughter, who is 5, if I asked sometimes. She gets escorted over by one of her siblings or parent. She's so pale that I swear she's almost translucent and rarely ever talks to my little girl while they play. When it's time for her to go home, one of her siblings will sneak up on me every damn time and startle me to say they've come to take her home. It's pretty much the only reason any of her siblings ever leave the house, honestly. They would walk over on foot to escort her back home. Her home was literally right next to our home. As a side note, I have stepped inside their house once, and there is virtually no furniture inside. There is a couch in the living room and 2 identical old area rugs. It's not a small house like 300 or 500 square feet, so the lack of other furniture is very noticeable. What are the kids doing in a house with no furniture? Only God knows, I guess. The parents are outside often though, and the husband refuses to let his wife do any kind of labor work. He'll pull a 12-hour day while she stays home, and then he'll mow the lawn when he gets home in the dead of summer for the longest time. We honestly didn't know what he did for a living. When we asked, he would just say, "I'm not in the military," and he wouldn't elaborate any further. Later on, we learned he works in the sanitation product industry, but no further detail. Okay, so here's where things get weird as fuck. One day he shows up with a giant refrigerated truck that won't fit in his driveway. He parks it in the street and leaves it running all day. It's not very quiet though, as I could hear the thing idling from inside my kitchen. Fast forward to 1 a.m. and as I'm snagging the glass of water, I see movement out on the street we live on. Something caught my eye. So I look out the window and saw the whole family outside. They were loading the refrigerated truck with large black bags at 1 o'clock in the morning. Even the shy 6-year-old little girl was helping, but with smaller bags. As I stared at the scene, I was dumbfounded, trying to rationalize what was happening. I just couldn't figure it out. They go at this for quite some time, then finally close up the truck and leave it running all night. The next day, as I was leaving for work around 7, I noticed the truck was still there and idling. A neighbor later said that they saw the husband drive it away about 30 minutes after 7. So fast forward over a year later, and they do it again. Well, the truck was back, but I didn't stay up to see if they were moving any bags again. I can only assume they did, because why else would they get the same truck? It reminds me of the movie The BBS, but creepier. Because there's no comedy involved, just real creepy vibes. To this day, I still wonder what was in those bags. So back in my early 20s, I moved into my first apartment. I quickly got a roommate and I was super excited to start living my adult life, but boy was I naive. Now there were all sorts of sketchy things going on in that apartment building. From the friendly drug dealer across the hall, to the frequently reported domestic violence situation going on upstairs, the fistfights in the parking lot, and other various things going on. But the one thing that I will always remember was the creepy-ass neighbor that lived down the hall from me. To get a better idea of the setup, all the apartments formed a square around the parking garage that was on the lower level. In the center of the garage, There were dumpsters, so everyone could just throw their trash down from the balcony outside. It should also be noted that everyone's kitchen windows faced out into the middle, so they were right along the walkway. On more than one occasion, my creepy neighbor would lean out his kitchen window and watch my roommate and I as we were leaving. We had to walk right past him to get to the stairs, and he would ask where we were going while giving us creepy compliments, saying we looked beautiful and whatnot. He even came up with excuses to invite us into his apartment. Like, he would say he ordered too much pizza or that he had some furniture he wanted to sell that we should come look at. Sometimes he would just stare at us intensely and make us want to run past him before he could do anything crazy. He also spent a lot of time every day rummaging through the dumpsters. I honestly have nothing against dumpster diving. Sometimes you do what needs to be done in order to survive, but doing it in broad daylight in front of all your neighbors whose trash is in said dumpster is just super creepy. Eventually, he was evicted, but he refused to leave. He left a barely legible all-caps handwritten note on his door, saying the landlords did not have permission to enter his apartment and hid whenever they came around. I remember seeing him dash to his door, grabbing one of the many notices they had left before dashing away again to wherever he spent his days. I still don't know how they finally got him out, but I'm pretty sure he continued to search through the dumpsters. After that, I got the hell out of there as soon as my lease ended. I hope he got the help he obviously needed, but I will never forget how scary that guy was.